Hi guys, today we're going to talk about weight management. Now I'm just going to aim to do a bit of an overview. I'm going to do a separate video to go more into detail on this, but hopefully this will give you a few pointers to think about and a better understanding of what's involved overall within weight management itself. Falconry techniques that have been passed from generation to generation aim to help us to work with our birds in a way that reflects the life of a wild bird of prey. Wild birds of prey can spend at least 85% of their day static, so sat up in a tree or on a ledge, and they're saving that energy really just for hunting. If they were to fly around and use that energy up having fun, when it came to time to hunt, then they're not going to have enough energy to fly. And this is very important for a predator because food equals survival. They don't have the freedoms that we do, so life is pretty black and white for them. If you think example of any apex predator such as a cheetah or a lion, they follow a very, very similar behaviour. So weight management is a term that you may have heard other falconers speak about, or it might be something that you've read in a falconry book, and it's something that crops up a lot. It's essentially a term that we use that describes all the methods and the equipment to manage a bird's condition. Our top priority as a falconer is to keep that bird both physically and mentally healthy. We have to look at the way that wild birds of prey work to understand why our birds also have this same mentality, even though they're captive bred. So without weight management, we can't begin to train our birds for free flight. At the end of the day, a hawk that isn't hungry won't want to do anything. Now, when you look to wild birds, you will see birds like buzzards and kites on the soar for a lot of the day, but remember, when they're on the soar, they're again not using any energy in the same way that a hawk sits up in a tree or a falcon sits out on a ledge. They're always looking for that easiest way possible to use the least amount of energy, because the more energy they burn, the more they have to replace. It all comes down to motivation, and that's, as a falconer, is the thing that we should be switching on to and trying to understand. If a bird isn't motivated to want to fly or to hunt, to look for food, you can't expect him to do anything. So our job as the falconer is to look for that window of motivation for our individual bird so that we can use that to choose the right moment to decide to fly that bird. We want a bird that has a good level of energy so that he can fly, he can hunt, he can pursue his quarry, but at the same time he's actually motivated to do so. If the bird isn't hungry, it won't actually understand what you're wanting to ask of it, and that's especially important in new birds that we haven't actually begun our training with, because as we offer food, we could offer the nicest piece of food in the world, but if the bird's not hungry, he's not going to want to be around us, and he's certainly not going to want to eat anything. So we need to understand when that bird is overweight or not motivated, because any training we try to do at that point isn't going to have any impact at all. If you choose to fly an overweight bird, if you're lucky, it's just going to be lazy or come across as lazy. If it's hunting something, it might well pull out of the flight and think, nope, I can come back to the falconer because they can give me some food. Why on earth do I want to go and chase that thing over there? Worst case scenario, you've got a bird that's actually going to blank you, ignore you, it's going to lose its focus, and it's going to take itself off somewhere, probably high up in a tree or on a building, and it's going to look at you like you're stupid because it's lost that motivation. So remember, simply, you can't expect any interest or focus from an overweight bird. Now, this is the point where really people jump to the wrong conclusion. So they go, oh, well, we've just discussed the fact that if a bird needs to be motivated, it needs to have a sense of hunger, of wanting to eat. I will cut its weight. I will make it really hungry, and then it'll want to fly to me, it'll want to be with me because it's super hungry, and that's the way I'm going to train my bird. That is really a dangerous and careless attitude to have. So we need to understand why that, on the flip side, is actually just as bad as working with an overweight bird. So with a bird that's overly hungry, we've got an even bigger issue. The last thing we want is a bird that's starved, and a bird that's starved is going to act out of desperation, not desire. So this is where you start to see aggressive behaviours forming, mantling over food, because the poor old bird's going, I really need to eat. And then when you try to fly that bird, if you've got a bird that's underweight because you've taken too much food away from it, you've got a bird that's going to have no performance. It's going to be really low in terms of energy, so you can't expect a bird that's underweight to go tearing off after its prey because it's got no energy reserves to do that. Hunger alone is not enough to train a bird of prey, and I've heard people say that, and it really makes me laugh, because at the end of the day we're working with very intelligent birds who cannot be swayed. You can't program these birds to do something that they don't want to do. So you know, I spend every single day justifying my existence to my birds and judging their thoughts about me in terms of how keen they are for food and basically how beneficial I am in their life. So really, falconry is based on positive reinforcement, and we see that really clearly. Every single time a bird moves forward in part of that training process, it decides to do something for itself. It's making a choice because it understands that that's beneficial. These guys are mega opportunistic. They wouldn't stay with me, they wouldn't fly back to me if they didn't think it was worth their while. I think one of the main driving forces for falconry, for me personally, is the fact that you are building such a unique relationship with these birds. It's built on confidence, it's built on trust, and for me the reward is taking a bird out, free flying and hunting with it, and for it to make that decision to work with me. So it's also worth mentioning the size of the bird. This is especially important when you're considering your choice of first bird. Here in the UK we have a huge range of birds available to us, and I'm going to discuss in another video about the reasons and the way to choose a bird. But in regards to weight management, what's worth remembering is the bigger the bird, the more margin for error you actually have between a bird that's not interested in food and a bird that's too low, that has not had enough food. The smaller the bird, the smaller that margin. And this is especially important for birds like falcons because they have a high metabolism. So when you think of something like a kestrel, the difference between them being overweight and underweight is really not many grams of weight at all, which in a larger bird would make zero difference to their performance. With a small bird, if you get their weight management wrong, you are going to spell absolute disaster for that bird. It's your job as a falconer to understand how much food that bird needs on a daily basis to maintain a healthy weight, and by maintaining that healthy weight you're going to get a responsive bird that performs well and wants to be around you. So we're looking for that window of motivation, and we simply tend to call that the flying weight. So you will often hear of the terms fat weight, flying weight, and sometimes hunting weight. If you think of a bird like an athlete, and like people in general, I can eat as much cake as I want, and boy do I love cake, but the thing is that if I eat too much cake, I'm going to get overweight. It's not healthy for me. I can't then be expected to do my job, which is very physical. So I have to obviously work out what's a healthy amount of food and what's a good balance of different types of food for me to maintain a healthy weight and for me to maintain you know, good body condition. And it's exactly the same for these guys. The bird, if allowed, would eat lots and lots of food and sit in a sort of food coma for days on end, but then they're not going to be exercising, they're not going to be working, they're not going to be increasing their muscle and their fitness. So if we as falconers can manage that weight well by giving them a good amount of good quality food, then we can help them to build muscle, we can help them to increase fitness, we can keep them flying regularly. A lot of newcomers get hung up often on the question of what should my bird weigh, and it's a question that we commonly hear or commonly get asked. Now it's important to remember that weight management is so much more than a number. It's not simply about one magical weight that that bird will perform at through its entire life. If you get stuck with thinking my bird flies exactly at 600 grams perfectly, and you fly your bird all through the season at that one weight, then something has gone wrong. What you need to remember is that muscle weighs more than fat, so what we naturally expect is for the bird's weight to start at one level and through the season to gently climb, because that bird should be increasing in condition and muscle. If your bird is finishing its season at the same weight or lower than when it started, you need to take a very careful look to understand what's gone wrong. One of those important factors that people often forget about is the keel bone, or more importantly, feeling the keel bone. So the keel bone is the breastbone down the centre of the bird's chest, and either side of that you can feel the level of fat and muscle, and this allows us as falconers to measure the condition, the body condition of that bird. So the keel bone will actually tell you a lot more about your bird's body condition than a set of scales ever could. So you should be able to judge the amount of fat and muscle either side of the ridge of the bone. A bird that's well muscled and healthy will have dense padding along each side of the bone, and you won't be able to feel much of the keel itself. However, a bird in low condition will have a sharp ridge of bone sticking out with very little muscle or fat to either side. When you're feeling the keel, if you are especially initially managing your first bird and its weight, it's a good warning sign for where maybe you've taken things in the wrong direction. So if you get yourself into a regular routine where, say, once a day, every day, the same time of day, when you weigh your birds on the scales, you take a minute afterwards just to feel that keel bone, you'll get into a routine. And if you do this right from when you start training your bird, you'll know the differences and the changes as they take place. Remember, you as the falconer are solely responsible both for the diet and the management of your bird in terms of its food and its body condition. So the choices you make will reflect on your bird and affect its performance in quite a big way. There's lots of factors that affect your bird's condition and performance, and I'm just going to go through those quickly now. This is something to bear in mind as and when you're training your bird, so that when you're having a moment where something's not going right, you can perhaps think, what are the things that might be affecting my bird's choices or the way in which it's flying? It's worth bearing in mind the bird's physical condition, the quantity and the quality of the food that you're feeding your bird, the time of day that you fly and feed your bird. So this could be in terms of, are you feeding it at the same time every day, 10 o'clock in the morning? If you fly your bird earlier or later than usual, that's going to affect how your bird performs, because either they're not going to be ready to fly because they're thinking, oh, it's a bit early for my dinner, or they're going to be really keen and hungry and going, where have you been? It was my dinner 3 hours ago. You need to consider the bond that your hawk has with you or doesn't have. If you're spending too much time focusing on food, but you're not actually spending time with your bird socialising it, that's going to affect the bond. You need to think about the weather conditions that the bird lives in. So how cold or hot is it? So that'll depend obviously on the time of year. That's really important, because the colder it is, the more energy they're going to lose trying to keep warm. So think about how climate's affecting your bird, its energy use, and how it will affect its performance. And then think of the weather conditions in terms of flying. If you're going through training and the bird's flying in wind for the first time and it's never done this before, it's going to think, gosh, this is new. You know, how am I going to work with this? So the conditions that you fly in, especially in terms of wind direction and speed, will massively affect your bird's performance. It might also mean that the bird is more likely to use more energy in windier and harsher conditions, so you're going to have to counteract that by giving them some extra food, because they're going to be burning more of their energy reserve. It's also worth thinking about how experienced your bird is in flying in certain type of topography. So are you flying in hills? Are you flying in woodland? Have they done that before? Is it open ground, closed ground? All of these factors will affect the way that your bird flies. You also need to consider, obviously, distractions. So you may fly in the same location. You might find that one day a surprise person appears out of a bush that you didn't know was there, or a dog runs out. There might be a tractor that goes by, something that the bird's not used to. And although the bird's used to flying in that location, they're not going to be prepared for a sudden distraction or surprise that neither of you were anticipating. So be aware of how that will affect your bird. Now, this comes into play because if you're flying a bird that's slightly on the overweight side, a surprise could make the difference between that bird focusing on you and losing all focus and wanting to fly off. You also need to think about the location. So when your bird's used to flying in a home environment, the more they fly in the same location, the more they hunt successfully in the same location, their confidence grows, their focus grows. So you start to feed them more food because they deserve it, because they've shown you that they're keen and they're interested, so we can start to build that weight up. However, you take them to a new location, you might take them on a field meet with other falconers, and suddenly your bird that's been performing brilliantly goes out of the window. Your bird might only be used to flying with you and your dog in a quiet field, not with 12 other falconers around and 5 or 6 dogs running around. That's going to affect your bird's performance. And one that people always forget is hormones. So at the moment we're in what I call silly season. The hormones are flowing, it's spring, birds are thinking about breeding. Sometimes they just lose their heads and they're more interested in finding a mate or building a nest than they are in actually flying with you. So it's important to take in considering the time of the year and how that will affect your bird mentally as well. Birds of prey thrive on routine, and it's the same for wild birds of prey. You know, a hawk will leave it to hunt first thing in the morning around the same time every day, just as the sun's getting up. They find their perfect routines, and if you watch your local wild birds of prey, you'll notice them using the same perches at the same time of day or being in the same locations, and our birds are no different. By giving them routine, we give them confidence, and that positively affects the way in which they're going to respond to us and the way in which they're going to perform. In any good falconry book that you read, you will read about how bad it is to drop your bird's weight down, and I hope you understand that from what I've explained. We don't want a bird that's starved. However, remember, you want to be careful not to push that weight up too much, because you will teach the bird to go off and do its own thing. It will start to self-hunt, or even worse, just learn to ignore you. It will put its foot up, look the other way, and basically say, I'm not really interested, and then you've got a whole separate battle. When you teach these birds things, they tend to stay with them for a long time, so the less bad habits that you can set in straight away, the better and the easier your relationship will become. So basically, you want to be flying your bird as high a weight as is healthy while maintaining that window of motivation, but not so high that they lose focus. If you're not sure about how you're managing the weight and you're not sure whether you're too high or too low, always feed the bird up, never take it down. If you get into a routine where you pick up, you weigh your bird, you feel the keel, you record those details about your bird, and then you take it out and train it or fly it, it will help both your confidence and your bird's confidence to grow, because you'll be able to safely and carefully manage both their weight and their condition. I hope that overview has been of use to you. It was really just a chance to mention different aspects of weight management and how they affect the performance of our birds. In the next couple of videos, I'm going to try and go into weight management in a little bit more detail. If you've got any questions, please comment down below and I'll try and address those too.